I ask people to look at what age do you feel and what memories come at that time with that age. So this is all part of helping to give people more of that ability to visualize these concepts in ways that are more concrete versus abstract.
Yeah. Emotional algebra, where the heart meets the math. What is integral is derivative as you figure out your path. Power plus emotions equals more than you can see. Listening to the wisdom of...
Welcome to Emotional Algebra with Dr. E. Emotional Algebra is a podcast to help us all become better people through understanding the different variables that drive our behaviors. I'm your co-host, Andrew Tavani.
And I'm Dr. E.
Dr. E, here we are again. Today, we have something a little bit different on tap. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you have planned?
Well, I wanted to kind of step back a little bit. We've talked a lot about, through the presentations that we had and the PowerPoints for eight sessions or 8 episodes. We walked through all these ways to approach power in relationships, our personal life, looking at some of those, power escalation in terms of conflict, the different dichotomies, the roles we play. And one of the things I often use in my work with people is I use poems as a way to connect, as a way to help them to look at their issues differently and also feel heard and listened to in the process. So I thought, let's go ahead and bring a poem into this discussion today. And I think throughout that, what we'll do is kind of have a discussion throughout the poem. I will give you guys a heads up. It's a longer poem, and it weaves a story. And I look forward to following along with this story, discussing it, and sharing this poem with you to see how it helps in our discussion today and future discussions.
Now, Dr. E, let me just ask you, this seems like a little bit of a different sort of thing. Like I said, compared to what we've been doing, is this something other psychologists use in their practice? This seems like just different type of approach.
I think they might. I don't. From the ones people I've talked to, it's not common, and that's one of the things I've been known for, doing things out of the box. So this is something that often people will use bibliotherapy, meaning giving them books to read or poems to read. It's not uncommon that I have people review or look at videos. I just gave somebody a TED Talk as a homework assignment to look at on anxiety. I think there's so much great information out there that people have access to today that's so easily accessible that I want to make sure people are seeing that therapy happens more than just in the office. And the way that we view ourselves, like often when I read a poem, or I might, look at even a painting with somebody or have them bring in a song, that's very common that I'll have people bring in a song or even play a song for them and with them, and we talk about that and does it connect with them. So that's often worth 10 sessions sometimes, because the images that are painted through songs and poems and pictures can say a lot more than any words that I could explain, or even sometimes they could explain.
Yes, songs, poems, bibliotherapy, Dr. E. That is not a term I've heard before. It's very interesting. So let's dive into it, shall we?
All right, sounds great. So here we go. Themes of dreams and fairy tale lore filled them with anticipation of wanting more. For it was here that they wanted to escape to be when nightmarish happenings visited their reality. The perception of fear made him run for his life from the shadows lurking behind. Too fearful he was to face its source. The emotions played with his mind. The absence of sound from what he was fleeing made him question the silent stalker. It wasn't until the butterfly approached that he realized he fled the harmless caller. From this point forth, logic stated, banishing you will be my rule. Every time I bring you out, you make me look like a stupid fool. Too many times when I listen to you, you only create more trouble. Anger has ended more friendships than not, where shame and guilt hide behind the rubble. Where respect and dignity, too proud for such a display? Speaking of pride, where was he? He's always wanted his day. Only then do failure and pessimism emerge to rub your nose in the mess. I've stood and watched too many times, too many wounds for one parent to dress. A family's not supposed to be like this, he said, as sadness and fear fled to be alone. Follow behind with the rest of you. I'll just do this on my own. Far in the distance, he heard them call. Have we been punished enough? I'll tell you when you've paid your dues, Logic retorted. You have yet to have it rough. It's me who has to face these storms, withstanding the rain, sleet, and wind. Even when I see them coming, they test my fortitude time and again. For even as I go it alone, I grow in strength without you. No longer do I have the burden of hurting the rest of you through. So at this point, Andrew, let's go ahead and stop a little bit here and just kind of review what we're talking about. So what I'm hoping that listeners and viewers are grasping is this idea of taking emotions and anthropomorphizing them, even logic, that concept of logic. And as we've talked about throughout time, we all have those parts and pieces inside of our head that are communicating back and forth, and we hear those voices. And some people might feel like they're crazy when they do, but everybody does this. And a lot of times we really don't realize it or pay attention to it, but that inner dialogue is happening all the time. So I know I gave you the advanced assignment of reading this before the podcast. So when you were reading this poem yourself, what were your thoughts up through maybe this point in the poem and grasping what was happening here?
Yeah, so something that you actually just said, you used the term anthropomorphizing. I was going to say personifying. I think one thing that struck me was sort of just the visualization of almost characters within this poem. It has very much a story like quality to it. And so I was getting some of the stuff we've talked about in previous episodes, I was sort of seeing in a different way here, visualizing a different way. We've used visuals quite a bit to understand some of the concepts you've been introducing. And I think in this, there's a whole different type of visualization going on. I'm seeing people, characters. So to answer your question, though, what I'm seeing is someone on a journey and being sort of accompanied by emotions or even distracted by emotions. And it even is taking sort of a dark turn right now. Now, I don't know if I'm reading that correctly or what. You've read this many times before, so.
Right. And that's part of it, is really starting to see how this, to me, in a lot of times becomes our self-talk. And it becomes our self-talk very early in our life, where we have aspects of us, which again, I kind of see these as, again, almost like different people inside. If we go back in the 90s or late 80s, there was a show on Fox called Herman's Head. That had all these characters and people inside. It said, obviously we know about Inside Out, kind of similar to that concept as well. So that idea that if we start to see our emotions and we start to almost, as you say, personify them, but give them a body. Often when I'm working with people, I'm asking them, what does fear look like? Or what does that part of you look like? Remember when we went back to that self-development slide, I asked people to look at what age do you feel? And what memories come at that time with that age. So this is all part of helping to give people more of that ability to visualize these concepts in ways that are more concrete versus abstract.
Yeah, and it's even more personal, right? It's like these are almost sentient beings, right? And I guess emotions can sort of function that way. I have not seen the movie Inside Out, so when you say that, I'm like, I don't quite have that reference point. And I haven't seen the Fox show you mentioned either, for that matter. But that's interesting that there's, sort of, I don't know, that I guess this, this sort of concept has surfaced in other ways.
Yeah, and it's something that I've always seen, even, regardless of those things that were presented. I felt that those shows and concepts really helped your everyday person kind of bring that idea home, because there's a lot of people who didn't see it that way until we started talking about it and giving them this idea that these parts and pieces of you to me are like living energy, and we want to understand that idea of seeing them as how they are. I've been asked people, how are they dressed? 20 years ago, I was working with somebody who had an issue with smoking. And in that process of working with them on their smoking issue, we did some hypnosis around it. And I said, I want you to see yourself in a park walking towards a bench. And as you're walking towards this bench, this part of you that's the smoker is walking towards you and going to sit at that bench with you in the park. And when I got to the point, I said, I asked them, what do you see? They said, it's this old lady with all these wrinkles, and she's got a black shawl on her head, and she is pissed off. I'm like, why is she pissed? She goes, why are you trying to get rid of me? Why do you want to get rid of me? I've tried to help you with all these issues in life. I tried to help life to be more easy on you. Now you want to get rid of me? So in that, they were directly able to see this personification or anthropomorphism of changing this concept into a being, and then having that discussion with them and helping them to see. And I said, my goal isn't to get rid of you. My goal is to shift what you do to help her find peace and comfort, to help her find a sense of relaxation and camaraderie with people. Because that's what often our habits get into, is our way to connect with people, or some of our behaviors are ways that help us cope and deal with things. So that's why I never look at any part of us as anything to be destroyed. Instead, I want people to understand why those aspects of us are there. And even as we're getting into this, logic looks at all these emotions as just getting in the way. They cause all these problems. He's like, just go away and I'll deal with all this. And that's kind of where we're at right now, is he says, hey, since you aren't around, I'm good without you. I don't have to carry you. I don't have to mess with you. Just stay away.
Yeah, that's sort of the word. If any one word kind of stuck out at me with where we've made it to, it's just like distraction, right? Logic's sort of like marching on this journey, and distraction coming from multiple sides and so forth. I don't know if that's sort of an accurate reading or...
well, I think, again, this is why I read poems, because it's not how I see the poem that's important. It's how other people that I'm working with are seeing the poem, because that's what it's evoking in them. If all I do is lecture people and tell them what to think and how to feel and what's happening with their emotions, that's not their journey of discovery. That's my journey of education. I want to bring out in people through giving them pictures that they can interpret. And poems to me are one great way of giving a picture that they can interpret, because how people see these is more important to me than I see it. It's the reading of the poem that evokes those thoughts. So let's go ahead and continue with the poem here. So the years rolled by and logic stood strong, passing the tests of age. As long as the rest of them stood silent in the shadows, success proved stronger than rage. And as they grew more discontent, logic outwitted them all. He pitted the strong against the weak, leaving confusion to take the fall. So even quickly, as I get back to this, is see the play on the different emotions, even turning age into like a person. So age is testing logic, and he's like, hey, I'm doing good. Logic wants to look strong. He's turning the emotions against each other. So success proves stronger than rage. And as he said, he pits the strong against the weak and leaving confusion. So the emotions that even focus on confusion say, hey, you're making a mess of this. And so that way, what's happening is all this distraction, diversion, a shifting of where our attention lies, which, as we can see, happens in the world around us often by those that we want to look up to and we want to trust, and often those people that want control and power over. It's not uncommon that they try to play with our emotions to evoke fear, doubt, guilt, shame, anger, rage, hatred, and how then we use these, and people want to use those emotions, and we use those emotions within ourselves to manipulate our own perspectives. So getting back to the poem, from behind the scenes, jealousy and rage began to organize the masses, for they sat quietly and watched logic work as unassuming students of his classes. Slowly and quietly, they snuck up on him and sent pessimism and doubt, disguised as wisdom and experience. They would slowly tire him out. So long it had been since he had seen them, he'd mistaken them for long-lost friends. Those emotions are fools, they said to him. You sending them away was a godsend. As logic had walked alone for so long, he seemed to enjoy their company. Perhaps his judgment had been weakened by absorbing the stress of so many. Quietly watching, the emotions began to moan like a symphony of creatures in the night. They slowly wore the aging man down and stopped when he turned with a glare at their sight. I do this for you, and what do I get but a bunch of grumbling children? Ungrateful as you are for my toils, have you noticed where we are and have been? Logic had slipped in an assumption of their sight since he neglected their perspective. From where they stood, they could not see, since their leader was so protective. So stopping right here, what are your thoughts at this point, Andrew?
Well, I think couple of quick observations before I get to my thoughts. I'm noticing too, just in the style that you've written, using capitals to really drive home, I think that these are characters or people, right? Like capitalizing some of the emotions is an interesting way of going about this, and sort of getting inside people's head about how they're supposed to sort of feel or what this is supposed to mean to them. As we go, I mean, it strikes me as very relatable to what people go through in life. And I don't want to say myself, but maybe me.
Oh, come on. You can admit it.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like these things come along. There's almost like a little bit of self-doubt that comes in, or I keep coming back to the idea of a distraction. And I guess if I'm being completely honest, I guess I want to think I'm always being logical. So I'm logic in this, but then I even wonder, maybe I'm not, maybe I'm not always so logical. Maybe I'm one of these other emotions that are sort of messing with logic.
I think the idea that logic can be purely logical is a fallacy. I think, even if you listen to, the key is listening to Logic's tone throughout this poem. He's using, anger and manipulation of other emotions through his own expression of emotion, through his idea that he's logical. And I think that's one of the things we want to see, is that even though we want to be logical, logic often gets channeled through our protective emotions, through arrogance, through defiance, through our cognitive defenses like justification, rationalization, minimization. And any defense is going to be motivated by minimally a threat, which is a fear-based emotion. So we are emotional beings. And part of this that I want to see a lot of times is helping people to realize who have wanted to see themselves as logical, to see that you're not as logical as you thought. You might be using logic, but when we can start to see, and this is where you're starting to see how our emotions inside are like, first of all, they're manipulating the situation. Remember, they disguise pessimism and doubt disguised as wisdom and experience. That whole idea that sometimes even our emotions will tell us they're part of logic, because they don't want to give up their kind of the wolf in sheep's clothing, as we might see it, but really they're just wanting to be understood. And how can we be understood if the people we're trying to communicate don't want to hear us, recognize us, listen to us, or even know us? And that's kind of the relationship that Logic developed with his emotions. He doesn't want to know them. He just wants to do what he wants to do and says, get out of the way.
Two things. So are you saying that Logic's a little bit of a fraud in this poem?
I think Logic has built his illusions and potentially delusions of how he wants to see himself. He feels like, again, we go back to our dichotomies, he has to be seen as good and strong and right and essentially perfect. And he feels like the aspects that create his imperfection are the emotions. So as long as he can see himself as in that good and strong and right and rule out emotion, then there is no bad and wrong and weak in that. And that is part of, like I said, the delusion and the illusion and the denial of the truth of, to me, our reality.
And so the other thing, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
The other thing I was going to say is, right at the end there, you had said he just wants to do what he wants to do and not be bothered by things. I mean, isn't that true of almost everybody to some degree?
To some degree, yeah. Even if what we're trying to do is to help other people, I think, we're often wanting to, at the core of us, remember, conscious mind's job is to help us survive and then thrive. And that's, to me, Logic wants to see how it can thrive, often in a world where it feels like it's surviving. So where we're getting at this point in the poem is you're going to see this turn. So often by the time people come to me in therapy, they're at this point where this poem is turning next. So let me kind of continue. And so enough of this anger spoke up with frustration close behind. If I have to live more day like this, I'm going to lose my mind. The others agreed it was time to act. Too much time had passed. The echoes of dissent were heard all around. Not far behind consciousness is where they had massed. It was just before the bugle was blown that a voice rang out loud. What would happen if logic was gone? Who would manage our unruly crowd? Perhaps he was right to send us here to work through our squabbles and plights. Maybe it was the best he knew to manage those many sleepless nights. Maybe now's the time to pull together for good, to realize all of our strengths. It will not be until he sees we can all work as one before he will give us his thanks. So many times we looked at him as being our evil oppressor, never thinking to look at ourselves as being his angry aggressors. Creators of trouble for him we were. We never meant to be mean. What else was he to do or to think when we left him with all the messes to clean? So at this point, you see this turn where anger's like he's ready to go out, kick butt and take some names and overthrow logic. So that's sometimes the time that people are starting to come to me, is that when their defenses start to fail and the emotions and the belief systems and the attitudes that they tried to control have now kind of started to run the asylum, so to speak, then logic can't manage that. Logic doesn't know how to manage it because logic, as we talked about before, is so out of touch with what's going on with the emotions that now he doesn't know what to do. So now this other voice comes up inside and says, hey, wait a minute. Let's try to understand logic's perspective. And let's see what did we do that affected him and how did he perceive us? That's, to me, the process of self-exploration of what we're doing here in this podcast, and often of what I'm doing with therapy, yet it's happening inside of this person's head and inside this poem. So continuing on, understanding speaks truth, said empathy. Can you imagine how logic must feel? He chose to go it alone all of these years. So what? Resentment retorted. Big deal. I've been kept from what is mine. It's time I got my due. It's remarks like that put us here. We all have needs, just like you. Calmness took control of the crowd by appealing to what they desired. Perhaps it is best to acknowledge all our needs, to let each other know we all are admired. He has a point, Sadness said. I'd like you all to acknowledge my pain. It's us who have to show ourselves that we can appreciate the sun and the rain. Together they sat for days on end, exploring each other's feelings. The richness their perspectives added to their world contributed to their healing. Suddenly all had stopped for a moment. As logic stood and stared in awe, they quietly acknowledged their silent onlooker, and he was amazed or felt amazed by what he saw. Now, I want people to realize what's happening here at this point. What's this change in the poem? So in other words, the significance as we get to this next stanza of who are the speakers, who approach logic. Obviously, with this, you start to envision what role these emotions play within ourselves. And now how does that shift as all these emotions begin to understand themselves and see their roles? Then how do they also shift the way that they also then look at logic? And again, you see logic here is like, what's happening? Because all of a sudden it's quiet inside. And he's wondering, why is it so quiet? What happened to all that noise? Any thoughts on your part, Andrew?
I feel like this is sort of a metaphor for therapy then, right? Taking the time to be mindful and to sort of self-examine, even if you're assisted in that self-examination.
And become more self-aware. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I mean, we've talked a lot about that, in many of the previous episodes, being self-aware, being mindful, understanding your own emotions and motivations.
Mm-hmm. And we're really getting to that concept now of true emotional specificity, as I've talked about. It's As I've looked at, remember, emotions are there to teach us things, tell us things, show us things, do things for us, help us do things for ourselves. So in this, as the emotions explored each other, and as logic, as we start to look at the logical purpose of each emotion, this is really that journey of beginning to understand emotional specificity. What is our purpose at each emotion? We want to ask, why are we here? What are we here to do, to show us, to teach us? And again, that's the whole thing, that the point that I really want to continue to drive home through the podcast and through each of these discussions. So continuing back, fear approached him and took his hand and led him to the center. Shame stood proudly as a representative of logic's former dissenters. We had spent many years in the dark and resented your demand for compliance. We all blamed you for our condition in life, never stopping to enjoy the silence. Yes, you share responsibility and may accept some blame, while we are willing to love you too, confidently stated Shame. We welcome you, logic, with open arms. Our support is extended to you. For when you sent us away for some silence, you did the best of the time with what you knew. Forgiven you are, resentment resounded. I speak on all our behalf. I cannot believe those words came from my mouth. He followed with a laugh. Logic stood surrounded by his family, feeling a sense of love and acceptance that he never knew existed. It was then that he led them all outside to spend their life in the light, forgiven. So, as some of you, and you alluded to earlier in our discussion, Andrew, you had said in the way I wrote this, and why I didn't say it in the beginning. I'd written this in 1995, in the beginning of really when I started doing therapy with people, and it's really when I started again to bring these whole images and visions home, of really helping people to see each emotion as, again, a different being within them, and a different being that was all our emotions, all we're seeking, all we really want is to feel loved and accepted. And when we create that rejection, or when we start to pit people against each other, our emotions against each other, we talked about belief systems and attitudes against each other, we continue to feed the disruption. So even look at that idea of Shame, who stood proudly the representative of logic's former dissenters. You know, what I say is the purpose of shame, and I might have said this before, is that shame lets us know when we've stopped loving ourselves. And when we can learn to love ourselves again, we can learn to love and understand the purpose of every emotion, every attitude, every belief, and stop our own self-judgment, stop our own self-hatred. Remember, hatred tries to push us away from things that we feel have caused us pain, are causing us pain, or could cause us pain. There's a value to pain, because pain helps us grow. Pain helps us learn. Pain helps us evolve. And those are the things that we want to start to look at more reflectively, and more from a deeper perspective of seeing that when we can understand every part of ourselves, and then we can extend that and understand where other people are coming from, there's nothing we can't do to change ourselves, and then also to contribute to change in the world.
Dr. E, the idea in the very last stanza, or the very last couple of lines of the poem, that there's that this is a family of emotions, I thought was interesting, because then it sort of, when you look back at the entire poem and sort of the journey that unfolded, it does seem like it could be just a big family, and it actually seems like family life at times, like arguments, distractions, emotions running high, running low, the range of emotions. I thought that was interesting. Is that sort of what you had intended there?
Exactly. Yeah. Because again, as in working with people, I think I've touched on that. I do a lot of work with hypnosis. There's times that I found help people to go back, and I ask them to find whatever time, place, memory, emotion, attitude, experience, belief, wherever they need to go, that'll help them understand what brings them to this point in life. Often when we're doing that work and they go back and find a part of them, I had somebody who came out of an experience and they said, the pain I've had in my chest since as long as I can remember is gone. Because what we helped them to find in there, they had basically tried to send away and bury inside. And once we help them to find that and connect with it, understand that, and I say, bring it to the light. I'm always helping people to find this light. This light is a place of warmth, peace, love, acceptance, safety, security, confidence, competence, power, strength, understanding, insight, knowledge, wisdom, intuition. And what I say is that light is what we've been looking for in everywhere and everyone else that we need to find within. And that's the whole concept that's been created here, is that when we find that light within ourselves and we bring every part of us to that concept of that light, then often there's an easing of those disruptions, because we find unconditional love within. We find the answers we've been looking for outside. We find that we have those answers within. So we are the ultimate expert on ourselves when we can allow those parts that are disrupted and want to be seen as good and or strong and or right, to see more equity within the self, to see that every emotion, just like sadness said, I'd like you all to acknowledge my pain, you know, that sadness wanted to feel understood. Guilt wants to try to make things better, you know, for what it did to other people, where sometimes guilt has to see that, oh, wait, I'm being used as a weapon to try to control the other feelings and emotions. So when we start to see these interactions between our emotions, beliefs, and attitudes, that's then where change happens. That's then when I've seen so many issues that people have, whether it's anxiety, depression, even I've worked with people with DID, or what they used to call multiple personalities. Those alters, those personalities, they absorb into the self. And it's not that they cease to exist, it's that they've coalesced into the whole self. And the same thing happens with people's belief systems and attitudes that felt so separate and so segregated. They now feel a part of the whole and a part of the one. And that's why I say, if each part of us inside feels unloved, rejected, abandoned, and then finds unconditional love, acceptance, and feels like it can forgive itself, that those parts can forgive each other, and we can find forgiveness for self, and therefore then forgiveness of others outside of us, then again, we're going to find our atonement through those actions, which then leads to our at-one-ment, if you break atonement into two words. And that's what I'm really helping people to find, is their at-one-ment through this process of self-exploration and healing.
You wrote this poem in the summer of 1995, which is almost 30 years ago, Dr. E.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me that a lot has changed in that time, right, in the world. It's a very different world than it was when you wrote this. But it seems like some of these concepts, the world has changed around them. They remain constant. These things that you're talking about then certainly apply to today's very different world. Is that right?
Well, it does. And, you know, the key to see is I wrote this about me. You know, this was really my way of my self-exploration. A lot of the poems I tell people that I've written, I wrote them about me, and I say I read them for them, because I knew that they could connect and relate. And if they knew that I wrote it about me and that I read it for them, they go, oh, you do get me. You do understand me. You have walked my path. And I think that's the key to see, is a lot of people want to really feel understood by others who are really helping to give them guidance. Because why should I trust somebody who's supposed to guide me on my journey when I didn't even know if they've walked a step of my path? Because I wanted them to know that, you know, that's why I say I'll stand behind you, shining a flashlight down all the paths you can take in your life. You take the path and we'll talk about it along the way. And in that, helping them see, yeah, I've walked some of your path. Not exactly, because this is my journey, whereas you understand those emotions. And in that understand, and this is where it kind of helped me to even see my path to healing. But yes, I think what you're saying is perfect, because, you know, in the election process, we can look at this whole situation as anger speaking up and saying, forget it. And it hasn't been such an issue of calmness, even at times taking control of the crowd. It's been outbursts that are kind of happening, and this unrest that has manifested because we don't have that trust. And when we don't have trust, the fear and the emotions related to fear, and fears that are to let us know when we need to protect ourselves, is going to call on protective emotions like anger, rage, hatred, defiance, flippancy, sarcasm, those 7 protective emotions, you know, that I've talked about before. So this really brings that to life within the self, and to really understand that often our psychological manifestation of our diagnoses, as I say, are really manifestations of our disrupted emotions that are just seeking to find peace and understanding.
So I didn't realize this was written about you, Dr. E. How did you feel when you wrote this versus how do you feel now? Do you
I feel like my writing, I often say it, while it comes from me, sometimes I feel it comes through me. And this was one of those poems that I really think I had some tears rolling down my face in writing it, because it was just, and I even feel them again right now, because it was just so powerful to really reach inside and gain this perspective. And then to see it, the impact that reading and sharing these has made in the lives of others has also been very rewarding, because it almost put the work we were doing into, into hyper mode, a hyperdrive, because it's like, oh, you get it, I get it. Now I have some way to visualize this and see it because of the way the story was told. And as it's evolved, I'm still working on finding my own love and self-acceptance. I still have some of those voices inside that I'm still finding the anchors to. I'm always doing my own work. And those who know me well, can attest to that. I don't necessarily say a lot, where I'm processing deeply inside often. And I think that letting people know that, hey, I'm on my journey too. Don't put me above you. Help me to see me beside you on this journey, I think is really critical to really helping people along their path.
That has almost a Christian type of feel to it. Did you ever hear that before? Like, I was raised Catholic, so I, read all that stuff. And there's like, I can't remember, I think it might be like a parable or something about walking on a beach. And somebody says to like Jesus, like, oh, there's only one set of footprints. You abandoned me. There were two sets before. Now there's one. And he's like, oh, no, that's when I was carrying you. Which is sort of like what you're saying here about being with somebody to guide them through something. Just reminds me of that concept.
Yeah, and I think the thing to see is, and often sometimes I have brought actually that poem, I think it was called Footprints.
Yes. Yeah.
But I have kind of brought the example up, I say, because while it's not my place to carry you, you can put your arm around my shoulder and we'll walk together, because I'll help them through that. Where what I'm very careful to not do in the process, and I think it is a great example, in that poem about how people see their spirituality and religiosity through that parable, is that, again, I am here to help support you to find your strengths, not to rescue you, but to help guide you along the way as you are finding more of yourself and realize the strength that they've had when often walking that beach, feeling alone while feeling so wounded, and then helping them find other aspects, other parts and pieces of themselves. Because even when I help them find the light inside themselves and doing that hypnotic work, I'm often helping them connect with other parts of them that we have already healed. So often there's a reunion and connection with these fragments or aspects of self that they're realizing, oh, wait, this part of me is inside, and this part of me is there to help me and guide me and support me. And we can work together now as a team, a family within ourselves, to really help ourselves find a more successful and life of peace and awareness, and then find the path that we feel really meant to be on, and know that life is happening for us, not to us.
At the beginning of the episode, Dr. E, you used a term I hadn't heard before, bibliotherapy. You also mentioned that with some of your patients, you've given them songs to listen to and so forth. And I know that you have a musical background. Had you ever thought of adding music to this and turning this into a song in some way?
I don't know about turning this into a song. What was always my vision is taking I have a whole book of poetry that I've written over the years, is giving a poem to different artists and asking artists to create a work of art based on that poem and see how it moved them. I've thought of having these kind of streaming with a quiet music behind it, but some of them I have thought, is there a way to turn some of these into song? And I don't know if the way that I write could lend to that, but who knows? Maybe it's something that I appreciate you suggesting.
Yeah, no, I was just curious because I know you have some serious musical chops. So just was curious if it was on your mind in some way.
Well, and I think,
very
again, that goes
interesting.
back to the idea of just trying to express ourselves in all the ways that we can, to not not put limits in our way, but see opportunities as in anything we try. Remember, failure tells us it's time to learn. That's it. Don't surround it with shame and guilt and inadequacy and unworthiness. Just saying, hey, there's more I can learn from doing this. Sometimes it's try something different. Sometimes it's try harder. Sometimes it's get somebody to help you, whether it's if you're trying to learn an instrument, get some lessons, things like that. So all these opportunities are here in the world that are before us. So as I see the world, I continue to see it a place of opportunity. I think, like I said, the time where we find ourselves right now is a great place of opportunity to self-explore, and then to explore each other and understand how we got here.
Well, it's a very interesting poem and a very moving poem, actually, Dr. E. And also a very just a different approach to things than we've taken on this podcast so far. So I think it was an interesting way to change things up. And hopefully all the listeners and viewers felt that as well.
Well, it's again, it was an honor to share it, and I look forward to hearing the response. So
yeah,
been a great journey today as usual, and always an honor to work with you, Andrew. And for all you listeners and viewers, until next time,